Welcome, everyone. Today's topic is about the nervous system, a very sophisticated system that scientists are still learning a lot about, still uncovering many mysteries about how it works. Nevertheless, it is a very important system that keeps everything in control. So let's begin. The nervous system. The human nervous system is made up of two major parts. One major part is called the central nervous system. It is mainly the brain and the spinal cord that runs in the middle of our vertebral column. Together, they make up the central nervous system, and commonly this can be abbreviated into CNS. The other part of the nervous system is the peripheral nervous system. These are the nerves extending out of the brain to different out of the brain and the spinal cord to many different parts all over the body. So, the nervous system is made up of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Now we're going to go over two different types of actions that are controlled by our nervous system. One of them is voluntary actions, and these are the actions that you intend to do. You meant to do them. They just didn't happen on their own. Unlike involuntary actions, these are ones that happen whether you think about them or not. They might even happen when you're asleep. So these are the two types of actions, and we want to compare between them. We said already the first difference between them is that voluntary actions require thinking. Involuntary actions do not require thinking, they happen without thinking, they take place without thinking. Of course, when you think, you make decisions, you go over stuff, so it takes time. Voluntary actions are slower in comparison with involuntary actions, which is actually good in certain situations. Now we'll tell you why. The voluntary actions are controlled mainly by the brain, while involuntary actions are controlled by the spinal cord. Most of them are controlled by the spinal cord. And here let's stop for a while to debate why is it better to allow the spinal cord to control these involuntary actions. Remember, the brain is at the top of your body. It is very far from many organs, let's say the liver, maybe if we're talking about your toes. So if you're stepping on a sharp object, the message will travel a very long distance to reach the brain. So because of the spinal cord being present in the vertebral column, it is very close to most of our organs, which is a good thing for it to be able to control the involuntary actions. Finally, why or which actions are voluntary actions? Everyday actions. So you can give us examples. What do you do and intend to do? Maybe I intend to drink, I intend to eat. These are the things that I think about. I intend to wear my clothes. I intend to talk to my friend on the phone, push a certain button. These are voluntary actions. While involuntary actions are those that help save your life, that preserve your health. Without them, many small things could have caused grave danger to our body. Only because we have involuntary actions, fortunately, that doesn't happen. So let's give some examples of voluntary actions. Writing, taking notes. Yes, this is a voluntary action. Running, jogging, swimming, any of these. There are numerous, endless lists of voluntary actions that we can go through. Involuntary actions, those you do not think about, you did not control, like sneezing, for example. You smelled something, or dust came, or what, you sneezed, you coughed. Many other things, other examples, such as, for example, your eyes watering when cutting onions, tears coming to your eyes if dust comes into them. You did not mean to produce such tears. So, this is an involuntary action. Your heart beating, whether you're asleep, awake, the heart beats, you did not think about it. It just happens. Were you awake? Were you asleep? It doesn't matter. It happens. Fortunately, it does happen. Yes, if we let that for the brain to control, and you need to remember asking your heart to beat all the time, will that be applicable? Will that be, what if I forgot? Fortunately, this is an involuntary action, and there are many, many others. So now we know the differences between them. Let's move on. The reflex arc is what we're going to talk about. It is the pathway through which the message travels from the spot where a stimulus was detected to where the effector shows the effect. Well, let's start taking it slowly. What is a stimulus? A stimulus is anything that your body can sense. So, if your body can sense light using your eyes, obviously, this is the receptor for the stimulus, which is light. Light is the stimulus, your eye is the receptor. So, the receptor detects a stimulus. Your ear is another receptor, it receives or it detects sound. Your nose is another receptor, contains other receptors that detect chemicals that you inhale. All right, so a stimulus is anything that you are able to detect, and you have special cells for that that we call a receptor. Receptor here is your skin. Nerve cells are in your skin, and they detect the stimulus, which is, in this example, the heat that came from this matchstick. Now, the receptor uh, produces electrical impulses that travel through this very long neuron. In this example, it's a very long neuron extending from the tip of your hand at the tip of your finger until it reaches the spinal cord. It is called the sensory neuron. What a lovely name. The name is exactly what this neuron does. It helps to take this message that you have sensed to the central nervous system. Remember, what is our central nervous system again? It is the brain and spinal cord. In this case, we're talking about the spinal cord. Now, the message travels down the sensory neuron, reaching the spinal cord, where a new neuron, another one, a neuron is another name for a nervous cell. So, this nerve cell is called a relay neuron. This one takes the message from the sensory neuron and passes it on to the third and last neuron in this path. It is called the motor neuron. The motor neuron is the third neuron in this pathway, in this reflex arc, and it takes the message, the electrical message, to your effector. It is the organ that will cause a change, cause a movement. For example, maybe you're going to pull your hand away from this hot object. Maybe you're going to blink your eyes because something is being thrown at your face, and so forth. So, it also could be a gland, for very important point, your tear glands, for example, producing tears. It could be adrenaline being produced when you saw something that is shocking, fearful, all right? So the effector could be a muscle or a gland, and the effector produces the final response. So this is the pathway through which an electrical impulse passes to create the effect or a response to a stimulus. Um, it is very important that we know the this sequence with the names of the neurons, where they go, where does the message travel through. Okay, let's move on. Here we have a diagram that shows how the cells look. We have at the top here, we have the sensory neuron. We have at the left hand side, connecting both neurons. In the middle here, we have the relay neuron, and at the bottom, we have finally the motor neuron. So, just a diagram to show how they look like. The sensory neuron. Here we have a cell that we need to be able to identify it. So if you see it in a diagram, you should be able to tell that this is the sensory neuron. You should be able also to know how to label it. So at the very far end over here, we have junctions with the sensory receptors. So this may be connected to the neurons in your skin that sense the heat or the pressure from a pin or so forth. The message travels down this part in the middle that we call the axon. The axon is a very long part. In the middle over here, we have the cell body. So here is where we have our nucleus surrounded with cytoplasm and, of course, our cell membrane. And then the axon is continuous until it reaches the very far end at the other end of the cell. These are junctions with other neurons in the central nervous system, CNS, remember? Now, can you tell me which cell would that be? Remember, it's the relay neuron. Yes, I remember that by the relay race they still have in the Olympics, where people in a team, they run with a certain object in their hand, and the person runs a certain distance. He hands this object to his teammate that runs another section, and so forth. We call this a relay race. Now, many neurons have a myelin sheath. This myelin sheath covers the cell to insulate it, and also it helps the message to travel faster. So sensory neurons, they receive the stimulus at one end, starting an electrical impulse, travels down the axon to reach the end of the cell. Also, the myelin sheath insulates the cell, we just said that, and speeds up this electrical impulse. The electrical impulse reaches, yes, we said that, the relay neuron at the spinal cord. Let's move on. Last but not least, the motor neuron. Here, this cell looks a bit different, and that's why we need to identify these cells. The motor neuron has the cell body at the beginning of the cell. So here is the cell body where we can see the nucleus, obviously, surrounded by cytoplasm, cell membrane, and here we have hair-like structures. We call it a dendron if it's only one. Many, we call them dendrites. These receive the impulses from the cell that came before it. Again, the relay neuron, remember? So the message travels through the cell body, down the axon, until it reaches the end of the cell. Here, the cell at the end has junctions or terminations. We call it the motor end plate, this area, where the electrical signal, when it reaches the muscle, it stimulates the muscle to contract. Or if it's with a gland, then it will cause the gland to produce the secretion. So this is the motor neuron. Also, motor neuron cells may have this myelin sheath that covers this cell to insulate it, just like the wires that you have at home. Electrical wires, they are made of a conducting material, metal in the middle, and then an insulating material around it, probably plastic-like. So this is the same idea. And again, the myelin sheath also helps the message to pass much faster. So it's a good thing to have. Finally, here we're going to consider one thing that is very special about neurons. Neurons, they don't touch. They have very small gaps between them. Over here, if we magnify this part or this part, we will see that there is a space between one neuron and the next. So how does electricity travel through this gap? It doesn't. There is no electricity passing in this area. But how does the message travel then if no electricity is passing? Well, here we have in this gap, chemicals will be released. We call them neurotransmitters. They are made inside the neuron at the end of the cell. They are stored inside these small vesicles or small vacuoles, and these vesicles, when the electricity reaches the end of this neuron, these vesicles come closer to the cell membrane and they burst out the chemicals. The neurotransmitters are now free to diffuse, move by diffusion from the place of high concentration to low concentration, and they find a special place where they can bind to. We call these a receptor. So this receptor here has a special shape that the neurotransmitter has a complementary shape, and then when they bind the neurotransmitters, when they bind to their receptors, a new electrical signal is generated in the next cell. Why all this complication? Why do we have this system? Why isn't it a one line of electrical signal going from one cell to another? Let's move on and tell you why. Well, let's begin by telling or naming the space. We call the spaces between these neurons, we call them synapses. So a synapse is a space between two neurons. And for those who have studied physics, you might have studied that there are two types of electricity, DC and AC, direct current and alternating current. Electricity can actually move in both directions in one wire, but we don't want that. In a reflex arc, when we want to pass a message, we want it to pass in a certain direction, from where the stimulus is received to where the effector is going to show its effect. So we need to make sure that electricity is moving in only one direction. And that's why we have synapses. A synapse helps to make sure it is somewhat like a valve. We know valves, we took them in our circulatory system. Remember, we had them in our, which blood vessel, remember? It's the vein, yes. Valves starts with a V and veins also start with a V. Yep. So they help to make sure, valves help to make sure that blood flows in only one direction, right? Again, here synapses also help to make sure that electricity or the message is passing in one direction from the sensory neuron to the relay neuron and from the relay neuron to the motor neuron. Okay, again, here we have a diagram where we have vesicles or small vacuoles, you can call it this or that. These chemicals, we call them neurotransmitters. They are stored inside these vesicles. When the electrical impulse reaches the end of the cell, again, I'm just repeating what I said in the previous slide, these vesicles come closer to the cell membrane, they burst, releasing their contents out of the vesicle, and they diffuse, the neurotransmitters diffuse, they bind onto the receptors, and a new electrical signal is generated in the new cell, in the new neuron. All right, so that's why we have synapses. They're important to make sure that the message moves in only one direction. Okay, this concludes our topic for today. I hope you understood all of it. I hope you find answering questions easier now. So, have a lovely day. Goodbye.